Oh, not yet, but we will. We definitely will. Oh, so let's see. Are we on? Hello, 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 my people. How you doing? Yes, there's a lot going on. We're excited about this. And also, if you are new to the Let's Harp About It sessions here at harp.org, fam, get involved, get connected, because yeah, we have quite this series planned out for you in terms of upcoming topics. If you haven't checked out the events page on the HARP page, that's www.harpnow.org. I mean, Dr. Anju Singh is all up in here. She is bringing the knowledge, she's bringing the research. She has done her research, let me tell you that. And so there's just amazing topics coming up. So please stay connected, stay tuned. I'm gonna give you all like 5 seconds. Please like, share, follow, tell your friends to join us. Please do. Um, like, so as you may know, today, first of all, I didn't even introduce myself. Hi again. I am your host. My name is Winnie O, right? And so I am the founder and your lead here for the Let's Harp About It sessions. And I literally have amazing guests, like, bam, like they'll speak for themselves, honestly. And so before we get into the meat and potatoes of the topic today, I would like to also give Dr. Anju Singh a moment to introduce herself if you're new to the show. Dr. Singh, welcome.
Hey, good evening, Winnie. Thank you again for having me. Quick introduction. I'm Dr. Anju Singh. My background, I was born and raised in India, completed a medical degree in India. I was trained as an ophthalmologist and eye surgeon. My arranged marriage brought me first to Canada and then to the US. In Canada, because I had equal status, I was able to pursue my professional career. But in the US, I came on an H-4 visa status where I did not have the permit to work. And that significantly impacted my life, basically derailed my professional career. Um, I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I put myself through graduate school as a single mom, got my PhD in molecular medicine from Penn State Hershey Medical Center. After having a PhD, I could not find employment in the area. So I was on welfare for 5 years. I did find employment outside of Pennsylvania, but I was not allowed to move because the laws don't allow the custodial parent to relocate with the child without the permission of the court and or permission of the other parent. So I found myself pretty much, for lack of a better word, I'll say I found myself imprisoned in central Pennsylvania, where I'm not allowed to leave, but I couldn't find a job. I ultimately got my green card and citizenship based on the VAWA Act. That's the Violence Against Women law, which was initially passed by our current president, President Biden, when he was a senator. So this topic today, consent and dating, is very close to me. And like I think, majority of women in the Me Too movement, we've learned consent is not always what it appears on the surface. There's consent, there's informed consent, and then there's misinformed consent, right? Right. Also, I am currently running for pathonatory in Dauphin County position. Not many people know what a pathonatory is. So if anybody has questions, please feel free to reach out and ask me. You're muted.
Yeah. Yes, and again, for your information out there, if you'd like to reach her, I will have her info on the slider there, but also we will include her. I will tag her in the comment sections as well. So please feel free to reach out to Dr. Singh directly if you're interested in finding out more about it. Please do, if you're not familiar with that role and what that position does in your respective region. Listen, at HARP, we are all about education and awareness, and it is important. Whoa, my batteries are running low. It is important to stay informed and stay aware on how policies and policymakers are affecting how you get to live your best life out here. That's all we're trying to say, and we'll leave it at that. But please, I mean, just your vote is your voice out here. At the end of the day, your vote is your voice. And even in all we do, right, at the end of the day, when we advocate for people, we're advocating for real, effective changes. and those usually happen to be connected in policy. So that's that, family. You can't say we didn't at least tell you. You can't say we didn't tell you. And so with that, we're gonna transition into again, we're gonna delve into today's topic, which is consent. It was actually informed consent and dating, and what happens or what doesn't happen when consent is or is not involved. Studies have shown that between 23% of women and approximately 14% of men have experienced severe physical violence by an intimate partner during their lifetime, right? And on a typical day, domestic violence hotlines nationwide receive over 19,000 calls, right? And let's be honest, by the time somebody's even thinking of calling for help, they have probably talked themselves out of it time and time again, right? People, that's usually not the first time that they're trying to get help. And sadly, I did post this earlier on the HARP Facebook page. There was a woman I saw. There was an article written about a woman who had, I believe, ended her partner's life, but it was in self-defense. Right, she had been enduring a domestic violence, domestic abuse situation, and had ended up, inflicting, fatal harm to that person. And she is the one who ended up getting jail time for that action, even though she was acting in self-defense. And you could see, she had reported it. There was an incident where, she had called for assistance and then changed her mind, right? And this is a cycle that happens oftentimes where, either the abuser convinces the person to take back their words and say, oh, it was an accident. I fell down the stairs. I tripped. Oh, it was just a scratch, right? Cover it with makeup, and we've even seen at times families try to convince the women to just stay because that's how you're a good wife, and also sometimes culture also tends to play a role in it. There are cultures that are very, I don't, speaking from my own culture, like I've seen it. And I hate when I hear the stories where women are told to go back to their families, to go back to the abuser to avoid bringing shame to the family. And if it's like even like the families will be like so proud of you for staying in an abusive relationship because somehow it's like you're proving something. And so I say all that to remind all of us that is not consent. That is not how a consensual relationship, a loving relationship works. And, in honor of Sexual Assault Awareness Month right now, April here that we're in, it is important that we highlight these stories, that we highlight these very real lived experiences from far too many people out there. For far too many women. I know domestic violence also happens to men, but it happens to women at a far more staggering rate. And even with COVID, we've seen that, as a cofactor as to how women are navigating, right, their relationships, teleworking, right? Now domestic violence has overlapped with workplace violence because now your home is your workplace, right? And employers were not even thinking about, most employers were not even thinking about how that comes into, how your employees are going to be managing their work. So, I just wanted to take time to really provide the space to address, understanding the importance of just consent in general. I really understand the power of consent. And, when we talk about consent, what is consent? In simple terms, it could be a noun or it could be a verb, right? An action or a thing. And it's the giving of permission for something to happen or not happen. It's an agreement to do something. And consent applies to every human interaction, not just in the bedroom with an intimate partner. It's from platonic to intimate relationships, and consent should absolutely be willingly and given from a place of informed decision making, right? And so I'm glad Dr. Singh highlighted to us that, at times consent is actually given from a place of misinformation. And I would just like to, take the time to give you ample time to really help us unpack this topic of conversation.
Thank you. So yes, so consent is, it seems like a simple, straightforward terminology, but it's not as simple. So, for example, number one, I'll make a disclosure. I'm not an expert on dating.
No, wow. On date, really?
Nor am I a psychologist or anything professionally. Okay, so I come from India. Culturally, we're not supposed to or expected to be dating.
Yeah, right. Come on now.
So that's again a taboo in our culture. So from that point of view, I'd say I'm no expert in dating. My knowledge or experience in dating from that point of view is limited.
It
But
is.
with that said, um, the opportunity to give fully informed consent is denied to women, probably to men too, but I can't speak on behalf of men because I've not been in the man's shoes. So I don't know how it plays out from a man's point of view. So I can only speak from a woman's point of view. And I can project, if you will, that it probably equal and opposite may be true for men as well. But for example, even for something simple as when I was eligible for my arranged marriage and my parents were looking out for my potential groom, and the potential grooms were sending their information. It was like sending their resume, right? So the person that my parents picked as my potential partner to arrange my marriage, in his resume, his date of birth was wrong, his height was wrong. Now, when I found out those few things were not accurate, for me that was, that's deception. You
Yes.
are purposely putting the wrong information there.
Mm-hmm.
Try to dismiss it as, oh, that's minor. Who cares if it's a couple of inches off or a couple of years off? And
Exactly.
my argument to that is, if you're going to lie about these small things, then what are you going to do when there's something higher at stake?
Mm.
That in a relationship, you need to start building trust. I've had a lot of people tell me, I don't lie except maybe it's a small white lie.
Nope.
I have a problem even with the so-called white lies.
Mm.
Because if you're going to be in that habit of small white lies on a daily basis, when there is no pressure on you, then what are you going to do when there is pressure on you? You're probably going to do what you've always done, is lie. And the problem with lies, I always call a lie is like a bubble in the water.
Mm.
So when you tell one lie, invariably you got to tell another lie to cover up the first lie. Then you got to tell another lie to cover up the other lie. And all you know is the lies just keep blowing up.
Mm.
Lie is like a bubble in the water. Sooner or later, with time, that lie is going to come to the surface. That bubble is going to come to the surface. So in India, our national motto, like how in America the national motto is "In God We Trust,"
Yeah.
in India, our national motto is "The truth shall prevail." Sooner or later, truth will come out and truth will win. So lies can buy you time. It can buy you a little bit of time here and there. It may be able to serve an advantage on a short term, but it never really helps out in the big term. So again, coming back to consent. So right from there, I believe I did not give fully informed consent
Yeah.
for my marriage because information was misrepresented to me, and our marriage started off on that wrong foot. I can't trust you. And it only went downhill from there, right? And then after even I was divorced and I was single, and then I started stepping into the dating world here in the US.
Yeah.
Majority of these dating sites and apps, 9 out of 10, 9 out of 10 times, the people were misrepresenting the facts.
Period.
Married men pretending to be single,
Or
or
an open relationship.
right, or saying something like, I'm going through a divorce,
Yes.
I'm working on it. And then
Mm-hmm.
when you start asking for facts, you realize the divorce is only happening between their ears.
Yes. Say it.
There's
Like,
nothing happening. So they misinform you, they mislead you, they string you along. And then you
mm-hmm.
find yourself in this awkward situation, which you never gave informed consent for because
Come
you
on.
believe the lies they tell you. And here's the sad part is once they get you emotionally, then they string you along on more and more lies and you buy into it and you buy into it and you buy into it. And that's my thing. I always tell girls,
Mm-hmm.
if a person lied to you once and you give them a chance to do it again, they're going to do it again. And then at that time, it's not their fault. They're just doing what they do.
Right, because it's almost like you told them that it is acceptable to treat me like this, and this is why, like, and sadly, we tend to learn these lessons from experience. It sucks.
And the sad reality again is we have to be really sometimes ask ourselves a lot of brutal and difficult questions, because sometimes we don't want to handle our own rejection.
Come on, sis, say it.
Right? So our own, whether it's our own ego, our own pride, or a sense of shame that, or we are scared. Or we are
right?
Somehow, and I'll put this out there right up front. Having been lived and been a citizen of 3 different countries, I can tell you this whole dating scene and the sexuality of women and stuff is so hyped. It's so hyped. It's unnecessarily hyped.
Oh yeah.
I'm noticing right from middle school age, girls are talking about, do you have a boyfriend? Like, really?
And
meet without a boyfriend? Do you need a boyfriend right now?
Yeah, that's usually my question. Is like, well, what does it mean for you in middle school to have a boyfriend? And right?
It's like a status symbol. So they'd rather be with a dysfunctional, abusive guy than to be single.
And I love
culture,
right? Yeah,
culture encourages that.
And because I remember, like, when I was, maybe it's also like a reflection of like the time when I was in Kenya, right? In those days when I was there growing up, like, literally, hey, you couldn't have a boyfriend. You couldn't even talk about boys. Like, boys did not exist. Your school and your education is your boyfriend. You will date that until you get your degree, and then you get married. Nobody spoke about dating anywhere in there. It was like, you go to school, boys do not exist. If you even look at them or even you kiss them, you get pregnant. So you know what you focus on your education, you get your degree, and you get a husband. And then, like, now I laugh about it and like I joke about it a lot. I'm like, oh, now you wish you had grandkids? Now you asking me for grandkids? I'm like, family. Like, where did y'all think I was supposed to get a husband between graduation and getting married? Like, right. My diploma did not come with a husband token. I'll be honest.
And those are 2, I would say, sort of relatively extreme points of view. You can't raise kids. So I went to an all-girls Catholic Christian school, right? So so growing up, we weren't exposed to guys and stuff, so we had no dating skills. But then you grow up, and then you're thrown out into the world.
Yes.
No skills, no nothing. You're the perfect prey. You're like that newly stocked fish in the pond. You're the easiest one to take the bait.
Oh, say it. And when I look back, and I've had to like unpack this in my like reflective moments, was realizing how, to me, I felt so emotionally stunted. Like, everybody else in this program, it's like they had like the secret sauce, and I was just trying to figure it out. Like, and there was like this, it felt like there was such a gap between those who knew and me just stepping into it in my 20s. Right.
And guess who knows? Guess who knows you're vulnerable and not skilled and not knowledgeable?
The people who are attracted to you, family.
The predators. They know they know how to spot their prey. They know, and that is so weird.
And they'll use that. They will always
use that. They will use that. They will use that against you, right? So there's that whole thing about not having full disclosure. When people are not open and honest with you, they're not transparent with you. I've been to the point like, hey, I want to see your driver's license.
Facts. No, seriously.
I don't know who you are. I want to see your driver's license. If you're not comfortable with your driver's license, I'll show you mine.
Yeah.
My driver's license, I'm okay with that. So it's not going to be one way. It's got to be both ways, kind of a thing. Talking about coming from the terminology roofie did not exist in my lexicon.
Yes. Oh my God. Yes.
It did not exist in my lexicon. And that's
Yes.
the thing, because we are outside girls. And I
Yeah.
think this applies not just to immigrants, but I think even within the American society, even within the white people. Just because someone has come from out of town and is now new in town, some of
Mm.
people, they can prey on her because she's not one of our own.
Yes. Oh my
Dare
goodness.
to do this to someone who's their own neighbor or something. But you're
Yes.
from out of town, you're not one of us. So we can do whatever we want with you. And you're like, you've come from out of town, you'll probably go back out of town. So it doesn't matter. So you're again high prey, if you will, at high risk to be preyed upon. So again, rules. And I learned this the hard way at the age of 36.
Wow.
At the age of 36, as a single mom, in hindsight, I'm like, damn, that's what happened to me. And this was
Yeah.
from it was a workplace related graduation party. So, you think you're with professional people. These are all people with MDs and PhDs. These are professional people, right? So you let your guard down thinking you're amongst trusted people. But that's the thing. It's the people who trust who take advantage of you.
Yes. Like, what's the statistic, right? There that the highest percentage of the probability of of abusers are oftentimes people who you're actually already like in your circle, right? They're people who you feel comfortable and familiar with. It's
Exactly.
usually not because it's usually like say, oh, it's a stranger danger. I'm like, not exactly. The stranger is usually the person that you actually think you can trust.
Exactly. Strangers usually tend to be either within the family, extended family, co-workers, someone you've known, someone you've dated a few times,
Mm,
right?
mm,
And because you
yes.
went out for dinner with that person, and
Yes.
just because you had a good time and you were relaxed and having fun and cracking jokes, doesn't mean that person has consent to do whatever the hell they want to do after dinner.
Yes.
And that's what a lot of people don't understand, that us having a good time and cracking jokes and having a good time is not consent.
Yes.
It's
And
not consent.
and I think also like and again I'll be doing more. I'll be sharing more on this topic of consent because like folks tend to think like, oh, but consent is so restricting. Like, they folks often tend to think of it in very like logic statement like, oh, I have to ask her, do you consent if I can kiss you now? Do you consent if I can do this? I'm like, not always. But consent is consent is sexy, and it can be sexy. Like, there's a way to do it. It could be verbal, it could be nonverbal, right? And it's like, and all like there are so many cues that one can get, right? And I often talk about like, listen, if you're confused at any point, if you are not sure that if this person is or is not giving consent, err on the side of caution. Please do err on the side of proceed with caution. Ask them, be very direct, and let fam. If you feel some type of way, you're absolutely allowed to take back your consent, even if you may have consented during the date to do something or before that incident, right? Because also I realize people sometimes don't realize that you can retract your consent, right?
There's a
Did
very
you
nice video out there that talks about consent and compares consent to making a cup of tea.
see? Yes,
Have you seen that one?
I love it. I love
Right?
it.
It's absolutely hilarious. It's funny, but it's very spot on. It's accurate. Just because
Yeah.
I said I want a cup of tea, by the time you made tea and came back to give me tea, I could have changed my mind and said I don't want tea. That's me withdrawing my consent, right? You can't
Yeah.
now shove the tea down my throat because 5 minutes ago I said, yes, I'm okay having tea. If I fell asleep while you were making tea, that doesn't mean you can still pour the tea into my mouth. I was awake when I gave consent, but now I'm asleep. That consent doesn't count now, right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Don't try to get women intoxicated because your
Oh,
inhibitions are inhibited.
yes.
What does intoxication do? It inhibits your inhibitions.
Yes.
And I've dealt with that with educated, smart, intelligent adult men. Like, how?
Right.
And then
And
they
and
pretend to be surprised. but you were having such a good time. Yes, I was having a good time sitting across the table from you, cracking jokes and having an intelligent conversation. I
Mhm.
enjoyed that thoroughly. But just because I enjoyed that thoroughly doesn't mean you're welcome into my bedroom.
Yes, or in my private physical space, because
It
people
might,
also.
exactly. And then men pretend as if there's something wrong. They try to blame you for not giving consent. Like somehow
uh,
it's your fault that just because you're having a good time, you shouldn't be having a good time if you don't intend to give consent. So they make you feel guilty for having a good time.
Like, to me, I'm like, I ought to be allowed to enjoy myself
Right?
with or without elevating things, or the need to consistently elevate. Maybe little, and I've had those moments where I was like, I was having a great time. I was like, all right, cool. Maybe this could be something. And then somebody just does something and it just rubs me the wrong way. And then I'm like, let's pause and let's have a conversation. I'm that, and maybe it's because also the, like, when you get to a certain point in maturity, you're finally able to own your bodily autonomy and be like, pause, let's regroup here. What is the point of all of this? Like,
Right.
I was like, I am no longer feeling this. I'm good. Thank you.
And a lot of men feel that the process of asking for consent is a, for lack of a better word, is a turn off for them.
For them, for them,
Right.
clarify, right?
For
Hear
them,
that correctly, family. For
it,
them.
it's stimulating when they force themselves on you and there's some resistance from you for that somehow. But that, if that's happening, that dynamic shows you this is a person who likes power play. This is a
Thank you.
person who wants to have power and control over you. This is
Yeah.
something that's going to quickly turn into an abusive situation if you ever try to assert your self-confidence.
Thank
Make that as a mental note.
Exactly. No, and also while we are on power play, right? We definitely, as the folks say in the industry, we don't want to yuck your yum or yum your yuck, right? We want to be very clear and remind folks that there's a difference when you are doing power play with informed consent. That's a very different thing, where both parties can come together and one chooses, a particular role of dominance or submission. That's different, right? We are addressing the issue of when one or both parties are not able to provide the consent in the interaction. And I'm glad you brought that up.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I can
Absolutely.
at least speak for myself, and I'm sure this is true for some other women, but perhaps not true for all women. It is very charming. It is extremely charming when a man pauses and says, "Are you sure?"
Yeah, right. Listen, right? Exactly. I was actually, I think it was at a YPOC thing on one of our Tuesday things, and
But
somebody, I
it's
think.
so charming. It immediately elevates that he is respecting me. And that
Yes.
makes you respect him even more. When you pause for a second, they'll look you in the eye and say, "Are you sure? Is it okay?" That's all it takes. It's not a big deal.
No, seriously, and that's what I keep saying. And even as Honoree here has said, consent can be nonverbal.
Yes.
Absolutely,
Yes.
consent is not
Definitely.
just, oh, like, may I do this, but also even when we do give verbal consent, is oftentimes the most direct way to say I am into this or I'm no longer into this, right? Or pause. And then when you add in the nonverbal consent, man, you often know when it's like a come, continue versus a like your literally, like your whole body tends to like push away or retract, or like you tense up. Like there's this natural response, you know. So, which is why, again, I know. I'm gonna pause for a second and like tag another incident of consent, which is not necessarily in dating, which is when I see these incidents of excessive use of force by law enforcement, and then you're doing all these things to a person, but then you're telling them to like relax. But I'm like, the body is literally responding in a very natural response. But then like you're like making it as if the person is the one not complying. I'm like, the body's natural response is to protect itself. It'll always go into like defense mode and protect itself in that fight or flight. And so it's just, to me, I just find it very like, it's very conflicting, where I'm like, did I was like, maybe y'all need to add consent work in your training, because it doesn't seem like y'all have it. Because even like, let's say you're dealing with somebody who has experienced sexual violence or some sort of sexual harassment, like they'll respond differently if you come at them the way I've seen it happen a lot. their body's going to respond differently, you know, or they will physically try to protect themselves. And then that will be looked at as, you know, resisting or non-compliance and all that good, and all that bad stuff, whatever, as they say. But coming back to in context of dating, I often remind folks that when I say consent is sexy, right, it includes the gamut of however one may be asking for consent, right? And I like even how you explain to people how, do you like this? Do you want me to stop? Can I go on? You can literally make consent sexy if you really are interested in doing that. It does not have to be dry and ashy. Okay. And I don't know why people don't get that. I was like,
you could write up a lawyer's deed, right? I hereby thereby say.
I'm like, please sign this. Let's
Right.
get this agreement first. Right. Which is like
forfeits my rights.
No, but like actually I feel like I've seen a movie like that. But yeah, never mind. But yes, but even when we do that, right? It's that particular consent is being given at a specific point in time, right? And even as we were saying, consent is dynamic, especially if you're dating. What you consented to or what you were able to consent to at that point in time could change from that point where you signed it up to the point where, things are elevated to something more intense, And yeah, like this topic, right?
And
So
that's
like
where dating turns into abuse. Is just because you were okay with it yesterday or last week doesn't
yes,
make it okay today.
yes,
And
right?
consent is important even within married couples.
Ooh, come on.
And that's one thing I think President Trump tried to change, that a husband cannot rape his wife. Yes, he can. Yes, he can. A wife has as much autonomy over her body, the man, and I think the reciprocal is true too. Same is true for same-sex marriages, same-sex partners, any partners, whether married or not. When you get into someone's personal space and contact with their body, any level of intimacy, you need to have permission. You need to have
every time.
And the important thing is body language. If you train yourself a little bit to understand each other's body language, if we understand our own body language, sometimes we ignore our own body language. We go where what we think we should be saying rather than what our body's telling us, not what we're feeling. And because we suppress our own feelings, we find ourselves consenting to stuff that we are not totally into it. And that's why consent changes quickly, because we consented when we weren't 100% into it. And then the next day or maybe a little while later, we realize, wait a sec, this is not what I want. That's why you withdraw consent. That's, what? Because your heart and your mind were not coordinated. And we need to respect that in ourselves and in other person. And that's one of the things that happens when a man is able to, quote unquote, pretend he got consent because he got it under the influence of alcohol, when the woman was under the influence of alcohol. And when the woman wakes up the next morning or whatever and says, oh, this is what I got myself into, somehow that quickly translates into, now we are girlfriend, boyfriend.
Ooh.
And then the girl, out of shame, kind of goes along for a while. Because she feels she put herself in this situation just out of shame and guilt and not having the assertiveness to stand up. I mean, imagine being 15, 16 years old and having this experience, right? And this can happen at any age, especially if you're an immigrant coming from a different culture, you haven't had the skill. This can happen at any age, at 25, 35, right?
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, because I've seen it where, it's somebody who's technically or legally an adult, but, because I saw an article, because I stay informed in my global harassment and assault news, and I saw an article about this Kenyan woman who was found dead the next morning in a hotel establishment or whatever, and literally like her spine was broken, and they're trying to understand life, and when they did the evaluated her, they're like, it was evident that there was some sort of like a sexual assault nature that she had experienced. And for me, the worst is when raggedy people in these comment section. And the worst part was that it was primarily men who were saying exactly what you're saying, that why did she put herself in that situation? Why did she go there? Well, the guy had paid for her to drink all night, like he paid for them. Like it was like almost like the guy was justified in abusing her because he had spent X amount of money. She shouldn't have put herself in that situation. And people forget that oftentimes, even for us educated people, right? People are saying, well, she's smart, she's a doctor, she's an engineer, she's a lawyer, she's whatever. Like, there's no way she's gonna find herself in a situation that's coercive. And I'm like, no. And even like sometimes being able to take yourself out of those situations, it doesn't seem like it's possible. Like, people don't get that.
In every
Doesn't seem
field,
like an option.
doesn't matter if you're doctor, engineer, rocket scientist, those people to use power. As you're talking about men who pay for dinner, pay for your drinks, they're paying for it to lay on some sort of, a sense of obligation. I'm doing this for you. I'm going to expect something in return. It's all unspoken understanding.
Right?
And we feel like we're obligated, that he paid for dinner, he paid for my drinks, he paid for a nice evening. I owe him this. No, you don't owe him diddly squat.
Girl, and that's why when I hear it, always go with your FU money. Always, right? So that and again, I know we tend to talk in the more like binary dynamic, but we understand that this happens also in people who are non-binary, right? So we're talking about, at the end of the day, we're talking about that the predator abuser versus their prey, or the victim who happens to be in that dynamic of the interaction. And so that's why for me, I say, I tell me and all my girls and all my friends, I'm like, fam, always walk ready with that FU money. Keep your card closed. Like, like if they try it, like, check please. Cause I've had to do that. I'm like, I'm good to go. Thank you. Check.
Right. And then if a woman does stand up and try to confront her, and again, I'm going with the binary, but if the victim does stand up and try to confront the predator and say that you forced yourself on me, this is not what I wanted, they will argue back and say, but you enjoyed it.
Right?
And they'll talk about the body's natural responses as their way of justifying that you wouldn't have responded that way if you weren't enjoying it. That is loaded BS.
Yeah. I mean,
that is loaded BS. Don't ever buy that. Yeah. I mean, I think President Trump had made those remarks too.
Yes.
Right? Clearly, that is not, no. Rape is rape.
Yeah.
And just because if a woman got wet or whatever else, you do not use that as a way to try and justify that she was enjoying it and she asked for it. And so it justifies the man forcing or the predator forcing themselves on the victim. And that's the thing, the victim blaming and shaming starts from the victim themselves sometimes.
Literally. Yeah.
The victims blame themselves. I got myself into this situation. He paid for my drinks. He paid for my food. I owe him this. I brought this upon myself. So the victim shaming starts sometimes from the victim themselves. So victims need to be, or potential victims need to be educated that yes, this all can happen, but yet if rape occurred, rape is rape is rape. And
yes.
And it's okay for you to stand up and against them and speak up against them and not to, and I think that's one of the big reasons a lot of victims don't respond, because they judge themselves. They sometimes tell themselves, I brought this upon myself. This is my fault. And all they need is one person from the outside to reinforce that.
Yes. That's why again, to me, it was like, that's why we have these, I would like to, continue having these conversations where we normalize, right? That process of unpacking all these toxic misinformation and miseducation, like, and misindoctrination that we've, collected and experienced along the way. Because the reality is, first of all, we are oftentimes not given a comprehensive, sexuality or reproductive health education. It's oftentimes missing from the curriculums, or missing from the social conversations of, how do you, mature through life, because it's a learning experience, right? And unless you're learning it from the right person who's able to give you a balanced or objective perspective, you could be heavily misinformed, and then you're sitting there like, dang man, I wish I knew. Always looking back, I'm like, I wish I knew that then, and I hear that so much. I hear that so much from my sister girls. And I'm sure there are guys also out there also who experience these. And yeah, to me, I'm just like, it's not okay. And that could, because even this topic came to me when I was looking into the underage pregnancy rates that spiked in Kenya. And actually it was in several countries. It was Kenya, I think there was Nigeria, and another country. I'm trying to remember specifically, but
lots of pregnancies.
yeah,
the US too.
Yeah.
Before he graduated high school, there were a bunch of his schoolmates who dropped out of high school or finished high school with a baby in arms.
Literally, yeah. And so for me, it was, the context was, and I'm specifically calling out because again, I followed up quite heavily in this, and it was like there was like 500,000 girls who were school age during COVID, and because it was, they saw this spike during COVID, and they're trying to understand or find the correlation between not being able to attend school and this spike. And then for me, I was like, okay, like we only, at this point, you're only counting the girls who have proof of abuse. You're not even including the girls who don't have proof of the abuse. And then you're also not including the boys then who are being abused, but obviously, society doesn't even address that. Society like doesn't allow them to talk about that, and then they're because they already feel like it's their fault and they're not men enough if that happens to them. And the worst part is like when then I hear women blaming those girls and being like, you are bringing shame, not that, oh, you're a victim, you've been abused, And so it's like this whole retraining that needs to happen where, it's not just men, perpetuating sexism and misogyny. It's also at times us. And I'm like, I really want us to truly advocate for that.
That's a very good point you bring up out there. Like, for example, when the Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky scandal happened, Hillary Clinton went after Monica Lewinsky.
Isn't that interesting?
And that's really sad.
Yeah.
When a predator is a predator is a predator, and the predators need to be held accountable.
Absolutely.
Blaming the victim, and a lot of like we've seen this happen to so many famous figures where they were caught with their pants down,
literally,
having mistresses or having affairs on the side. But the wives of these people usually go and shame the other woman, only later on to realize that other woman was not the only woman. There's a long list of women. How many women are you going to shame? Right? So at the end of the day, you got to hold the perpetrator, the abuser accountable, even if the abuser is your husband, your boss, is a rich man, is a powerful man. You got to, because they're using their power and their money as a weapon or as a tool to get what they want, right? I wanted to touch, do you know what happened about the, and I know it was in news just recently, I should refresh my knowledge on that, with the whole suing of the church, the priests.
Yeah, yes, I know.
That was a major ball dropped. That was a major ball dropped. All of these people who came forward and spoke up, I can't even imagine what they're going through right now. They're probably reliving that trauma, just another level of disappointment. That was just terrible.
And so for me, it was like, that's the thing where oftentimes we don't talk about the issue until it is an issue. And to me, by that point, it's already too late.
I would say in this case, it's never too late. So I do want to give a quick shout out. Eugene D. Pasquale did a great job with catching up on all the backlog rape kits. We had so many backlogged rape kits. in Dauphin County. So until the rape kits are not analyzed, the cases don't move forward. So rape kit analysis must be done in a timely manner. The perpetrators must be held accountable in a timely manner. The victims must get the support and closure that they need in a timely manner.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad you corrected, because actually I was thinking it in my head and I was like, okay, so how do I say it? Yes, in context of prevention, like us addressing the issue, like, what do the health sectors often say? Like, prevention is better than having to like treat it, right? So if we can prevent it, prevent these incidents from happening, which is again why we have HARP, right? Making sure that we're doing our part respectively, wherever you are across the globe, because harassment and assault, this abuse, pervasiveness, it is not just a local issue. It is not local to Harrisburg. It is not local to Pennsylvania or the United States. This is a global issue that happens across the globe. But the reality, it also has very local solutions. We can implement local politics and local policies to really have effective solutions to make communities safer. That's the goal of this, and again, quick plug, if you have literally like 6 minutes, because it takes 3 minutes for each survey, on HARP we have 2 climate surveys. One is for harassment and assault incidents, and one is for police related incidents. Please take a moment, go to www.harpnow.org, complete those surveys for us, because it helps us build a clearer picture of what harassment and assault really looks like right where you are, in your region. Because again, we've seen it, like harassment and assault oftentimes is very contextual to also region, right? Because what people assume is harassment may vary depending where you are and what perhaps your culture may say is okay, right? What culture, what is culturally acceptable, right? Because I know there are some sects of society where people will be like, oh, hitting your wife is okay. But I'm like, no, it's not. Not to me. Like, that's abuse. But there are people who be like, oh, that's just how you keep them in check. That is just how you control them. That's how they show you love.
So a quick question, how far back in time, so these people who are going to fill out these surveys, how far back in time can they go? Because there's a statute of limitation, right?
Correct. Yeah. And so actually, that's a good question. So it's well, the climate survey actually, it's to evaluate people's, for the climate survey, it's to evaluate people's perceptions and experiences. So it could be, it's evaluating, have you ever experienced harassment? Have you ever experienced street harassment, right? So it could be, there's really no time limit. Now, when it comes to if you use the HARP it button, we prefer that those be, closer time to when you're actually harping it. So the HARP it, we have, again, it's two separate buttons for the HARP it. It's if you've experienced or if you're witnessing or you witnessed an incident occur. So you can use the HARP it for the harassment and assault incident, and we have the separate button specifically for police-related incidents.
And for the climate survey, if a person has more than one incident of harassment or sexual assault, do they have an option to put in several different incidences in one feed, or do they have to fill out separate forms?
Like in the singular form, there's options where you can click through of what has occurred. And also, if you feel like maybe there is an aspect of it that's missing, or you would like to see a particular question and added to the survey, I welcome those as well, because that's the perk of crowdsourcing, right? It's a bit more dynamic. Yes.
Right. So and I know we're running close to our time, but one quick thing we wanted to touch on, remember, was talking about post-traumatic amnesia.
Oh yes, before we forget.
Lot of victims of domestic abuse and rape usually have post-traumatic amnesia, and that's again a very hotly debated topic, but it is a very real and legit thing. Because our body doesn't want to handle stress in the long term. It's not healthy for the body. So the body chooses to shut certain traumatic memories off so that the rest of us can continue functioning. But just because the body shut it off and the person had post-traumatic amnesia, that does not make it invalid.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, with the ways the laws are set up, an average person who's had post-traumatic amnesia, that amnesia can last up to 2 years easily, because it takes that person up to 2 years to emotionally even begin the healing process till those memories resurface. And when those memories resurface, people can literally physically, I mean, there are people who've identified the minute those memories came back to them, they immediately double up and roll and fall on the floor. And these are memories from 2 years, 3 years ago. But at that point, they can't do anything because it's past the status, right?
Or decades. As I've known people who they've experienced some sexual violence. Again, it may not necessarily be rape. However you define it, it could be any kind of sexual violence that somebody experiences. You're right. And then brain, does what the brain is supposed to do, which is to protect you and help you survive, right? And I've seen and I've talked to people or people have shared experiences where they're like, something happened in their childhood and it's like they forget, and then like somebody asked them a question, an innocuous question, and they're like, it comes back to them, and they're like, holy crap, I totally forgot about that. Like they genuinely forgot about it.
It's just making the hair on my head stand up right now. It's sad. But then imagine how helpless you feel, because just because it happened so many years ago, there's nothing you can do about that. Is that fair? Is that okay? Do we need to modify our laws because of that? And again, the other side will argue and say they are using that as a way to manipulate or harass someone. And I'm sure there are people who do that too.
Yes.
But I think there needs to be laws to make sure there is an avenue for people who've suffered trauma like this in their past, that they are able to pursue justice.
I agree. I wholeheartedly agree on that because yeah, especially, I know with some of the trials that we saw in recent years, people are like, why did it take them so long to come out? I'm like, do we like,
especially childhood trauma.
Where do I start on this? Because I'm like, listen, that's such a complex. And then even just for me also, going back to the way people treat victims, right? And we see time and time again, right? People who finally decide to do something about it, and sometimes it could be a fatal, it could be a fatal incident. The victim still gets penalized. Oftentimes, the victim is the one who gets penalized when they're trying to stand up for themselves and get out of these abusive situations and relationships. And at the end of the day, what we want to do here at HARP, and even with Dr. Anju Singh here, is to continue providing these spaces and, allowing you guys out there to also share your stories, share your experiences. If we can help the next person feel confident enough to speak up about these incidents that they are very real and they are happening, even if we don't want to think about them because we know it's uncomfortable and it's embarrassing. It's a stain on society, but it's the reality, and we won't be able to deal with it unless if we acknowledge them and do something about it and change policies. Really, it comes down to changing policies, right?
We really need to push for something so that we don't have any more Christine Blaseys. Christine Blasey really put herself out there, and she had no selfish reason to do that. And the hell she was put through was so unfair to her, and the whole outcome of that hearing was not fair at all. We need to change that, because that was such a huge step backward for women who finally mustered the courage to step up and speak. And she had no selfish interest. She had absolutely no selfish interest to put herself there. And I remember being very, very disappointed, very let down with how all that turned out. And I can only imagine how other survivors of violence and sexual abuse felt.
Absolutely, yeah, because people look at those incidents and they're like, well, it's just one person. But I'm like, no, it's not just one person. It's that person and everybody else that they represent in that circle of that lived experience. And so, thank you so much.
And to end on a happy note, I didn't want to end on the sad.
Absolutely.
Christine Blasey. To end on a happy note, these social media, even if we don't get a lot of people and followers and likes, I think even if it helps one person,
literally,
it's totally worth it. Like I was on LinkedIn, I was engaged in some debate about, the current shutdown and work from home life and stuff. And I was engaged in this back and forth. And somebody read my post, and she said, reading your story was so inspiring. I didn't think, she's a high school student. She didn't think she would survive and graduate from high school because she was struggling with domestic violence. And she says, reading your story, seeing what you've survived, seeing what you've come through, seeing where you are today has given me hope. And if we can just give that hope to that one person to get through that one day, that's a huge accomplishment. This is a person I don't know. I don't know if I'll ever meet this person, but if I was able to give that person hope to get through that, hey, you know what? That you may be in a rough patch now. You may think there's no light at the end of the tunnel, but we are here.
Yeah.
We've been through it.
And that's interesting.
You can get through it too. You can get through it too.
And I love that. First of all, please note where she said the person read it. It was on your LinkedIn page. And again, I know we can't really go into it too much right now because of time restrictions, but it's funny how people often try to tell folks, oh, that is not professional. That is not for this space. And I'm like, you have no idea the things that the way or the mechanisms that you reach somebody who is literally like in dire need of just hope, to believe that like there's hope at the end of that tunnel, that there's light at the end of that tunnel. You have no idea. So for me, just the fact that you said it was on LinkedIn,
right.
Right.
And I don't share personal stuff on LinkedIn usually, but I think right now, this is my personal view, and I think it makes sense. Human life,
yes,
is the most valuable thing.
Yes.
Without human life, money and gold and silver and diamonds and power and politics, none of it would be there. It doesn't matter. And this is something I tell my kids. Like when my son was going away to Boy Scouts for the first time, I had that separation anxiety. It's that invisible umbilical cord was being cut yet again. And I told him to take care of himself. I said, honey, this little body of yours, this is worth more than all the money and diamonds and pearls in the world to me. So take care of this body, because this is my whole lifetime, more than my whole wealth in the whole world. That's how precious you are. And I tell my daughters the same thing. Treat yourself like the queen you are. And I don't mean it by wearing fancy clothes and expensive jewelry. You're a queen. You need to be treated with decency and respect. Don't put up with being treated poorly. Don't treat yourself poorly, because if you treat yourself poorly, you make that poor treatment your norm.
That part.
Then you allow others to treat you poorly too. Or if you treat yourself poorly, you're giving someone else permission to treat you poorly too. So hold yourself to a standard. I'm not saying be hard to yourself. You're going to have mistakes. You're going to have setbacks. You're going to have days you're going to not make very good decisions. You learn from it. You grow from it. You try better. But always surround yourself with people who will treat you with that dignity and respect you deserve. And remember, you are a human life, whether it's yours or anybody else's. Human life has more value than any amount of money, any amount of power. And see, that's what this whole referendum is all about, changing of power and giving power to people who are in politics, who have special interests and stuff. But it's putting lives at risk. It's putting common people's lives at risk. And that is never okay. That's never okay.
Listen, like, I don't have anything to add after that. You said it all. So again, thank you. I appreciate you. And for those of you out there watching, I hope that this encourages you to speak up and to share the light with the next person. So we hope to catch you on the next Let's Harp About It right here on the HARP platform. That's www.harpnow.org, or on social media platforms at harpnow.org. And yeah, with that, have a lovely rest of your weekend. Take care of yourselves and one another. And we'll see you on the next Let's Harp About It.
Take care. See ya. Bye.
Bye.